if what you're saying is true and your colleagues do show up drinking to come to work and vote, which I think would maybe be concerning to those taxpayers who pay them, how is the bad behavior of a sitting senator a defense of someone who wants to run the Pentagon?
It's not. What they were saying is he was incapable of doing his job. And Caitlin, what I was trying to get to is if you're capable of doing your job and you're able to still drink on the job or late in the evening, then don't tell me that Pete can't. And Pete had already said he's not going to drink, but they just kept hammering it.
Sure. Just for the record, have you seen anyone show up drunk to vote in the Senate? Like Senator Markwayne Mullin said today, that kind of raised a lot of eyebrows. I mean, I remember back in the 80s with Ted Kennedy, he is legendary. But anything you want to tell us tonight about any of your colleagues, just among us chickens here?
Well, yeah, no, I don't know any underlying stories, and there are probably some out there.
So a little bit of a disagreement there between two senators, and Markwayne Mullin and Tommy Tuberville. And I think somehow, despite the fact that they're directly opposed on this topic, I think they're both terrible. Like Markwayne Mullin implying that because in his view, senators are just constantly drunk while engaging in their job. That means it's okay for the head of the Pentagon. That's an interesting take. Also, I don't believe Tommy Tuberville at all. I'm sure many of them are drunk on the job. But also, so if the senators are drunk and they can do their job, is no reason to bring in a drunk to be head of the Pentagon. That should be clear. There's plenty of people who could fill that role who have far more experience, aren't drunks and also haven't been accused of sexual assault. But also, I'll take his idea seriously there. Yeah, I do have a higher standard for the head of the Pentagon. Like a senator does their vote or whatever, but most of the time, it's not a 24/7 position necessarily. In times of emergency it is, which is why we mock people like Ted Cruz who flee when they should be doing their job. But I would be much more comfortable with senators having a bit of a drinking problem than someone who at any given moment might have to defend our country against a foreign invasion. So it's not even a good point, Markwayne Mullin. And so, and again, we should be able to have higher standards. And by the way, Markwayne Mullin would. Does anyone think that if Joe Biden put up someone for one of these positions and then they found out that the guy is a raging alcoholic, does anyone think that the right would be like, that's okay, we all like to party? Nobody actually thinks that. But that effectively is their position on Pete Hegseth. And by the way, he started this. He said, how many senators have shown up drunk to vote at night? Have any of you guys asked them to step down and resign from their job? And don't tell me you haven't seen it because I know you have. And I will remind everyone that he has said, sure, I was a drunk, but don't worry, I'm not gonna drink if I get this position. Which first of all, if you're an alcoholic and you say that you will become sober conditionally, that's already a big warning sign. But then when Mazie Hirono says, so you'll resign if you start drinking, and he refuses to admit it, then, well, I don't trust your promise at all. You're saying, I won't drink. But then why won't you leave the job if you do? You've made a promise, a vow. And we all know that Pete Hegseth, he takes vows very seriously sometimes. But anyway, we're gonna get to the other things that he refused to answer. But what do you make about this fight about his alcoholism?
He has a problem. He's not admitted it, okay? He says he's a changed man. He won't say that he'll resign. Anybody who knows anything about alcoholism, which is a disease, knows that what you said is true. You can't make these promises. It's a day by day, sometimes hour by hour. He can't even step away to do the meetings. That's how 24/7 this job is. And to have these bums in Congress going back and forth about, I know you are, but what am I? You know what I mean? Like, remember when Kavanaugh was foaming at the mouth towards Senator Klobuchar when she asked him about drinking and talked about her father, and he's like, what about you? You had a blackout. I mean, it's just stupid. It's so important, this job. And yet they're bringing the bar down so low. I've seen drunks and pill poppers in a lot of the newsrooms I've been in, okay? Par for the course. But then we're not sending troops into battle, okay? And I wasn't one of them. It's not the same thing, Pete. Yeah. Come on, this is Trump's playbook. They said, this is what you're gonna say to that. We have intel. Just even if we don't have intel, just make them think you do. You're about to name names.
100%. Yeah, and again, I'll say what I said yesterday. He was constantly saying like, "Oh no, the reason that I'm for years have been routinely bad mouthing women who are soldiers and gay people who are soldiers and trans soldiers and all that is because the standards are too low." Hey, now could you lower your standards so it's okay for me to be a raging drunk as I'm in charge of our military? He is just Pete Hegseth wants DEI for alcoholics. That's all this is, and in a larger sense, this is one of the themes of our time. The right, it doesn't really have much of an ideology. They want the rich to win, and other than that, it's nihilism. They will support whatever Trump wants or whatever they need to in the moment. They will say whatever they need to in the moment. Nothing that they say or do should be interpreted as being even loosely connected to a principle, to a value, because principles endure. Values have sort of like an inertia to them. They're supposed to mean something outside of one moment in one place, but they don't have that. They don't do that anymore. And this should be a reminder of that. And by the way, in addition to refusing to answer whether he would resign if he drinks, we put together this list or whatever. And to be clear, he refused to answer. And as always, when they refuse to answer, they're answering. We're not gonna play games about ambiguity. There's no ambiguity. If you will not give us the good answer, I have to assume the bad one. So will he resign if he drinks? No, he will not. Will he drink? Yes, he very much will. Should domestic violence be disqualifying? Obviously it should be, but he refused to say that. Why? Because he has engaged in domestic violence. That's the allegation against him. And someone who hasn't would of course say it's disqualifying. I've never beaten a domestic partner. I personally think you should lose whatever job you have. I feel perfectly comfortable saying that because I haven't done it. Pete Hegseth all of a sudden gets a little bit squirrely if you ask him about domestic violence. Would he use the military against Americans? He won't say that he won't, so I have to assume that he will. And so you should be very enthusiastic about Pete Hegseth taking over the military if you pine for the day, someday, when they'll start firing on protesters. Would he seize Greenland by force? He refused to rule it out. That means he would. Should the US follow the Geneva Conventions? He refused to say that we should, which means that he will not. You will have more war crimes under Pete Hegseth. All of this is super clear, and literally, as of right now, it looks like every Republican senator has no problem with any of this. Any other thoughts?
I don't believe he did the sit-ups either. Remember, yesterday he said, "Oh, I did 47 sit-ups, 5 sets this morning." Everything is a lie. This guy won't release the women who are very afraid in his personal life from the NDAs, so that's very telling too. Well, just tell your story. I got the proof to back it up that I'm not these things, but you are these things. So they must not tell their stories. He just kept saying, smear, smear, smear.
Yeah.
No, you, Pete.
Again, it's the right, it's nihilistic identity politics. So if he has cheated on a bunch of his wives, if he's fathered kids out of wedlock, the sort of thing that you might remember for past decades, they would demonize like black men for being terrible for doing this stuff. Pete Hegseth doesn't matter. Donald Trump doesn't matter. Totally cool, because it's the identity that matters, not the actions, not what you actually do, just the identity. He's a drunk. He now is accused of domestic violence. He's accused of sexual assault. None of that is disqualifying because he's a conservative white man. But if you're a lesbian in charge of a fire department, I don't need to hear anymore. I don't want to hear anymore. Based on your identity alone, you are disqualified. Based on his identity alone, it does not matter what he has done, what he has said, what he's advocated for. Him screaming to a room of people, "Kill all Muslims," utterly irrelevant. Now, if another candidate had said "kill all Christians" based purely on the identity being different in that case, then that would be disqualifying, but not in this case. When you click the join button and become a tier 2 member, you get access to all of our weekly top 10 lists. What are you waiting for?